Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for Fire for Lawyers. We're going to be talking all about fire strategies today. I'm joined with the fabulous lawyer money coach, Ro Thomas. We're both going to give a little bit of background on ourselves and our journey and the specific fire strategies that work for lawyers if you want to achieve financial independence and maybe even retire early. Let's get started. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Jessica Medina. If you don't already know me, I am a former lawyer turned accredited financial counselor, which means that I help lawyers with their money issues, specifically anyone who is looking to make a career transition from one type of lawyer to another or out of the law altogether. I graduated from Columbia Law School many, many years ago as a single mom of twins. So it was a super fun time in life to be embarking on this career. I went straight into big law because I had $200,000 of student loans and I didn't really see another option. I then transitioned over to the federal government, which had always been my original dream as a lawyer. I was at the Securities and Exchange Commission in the Division of Enforcement, which is where I got really exposed to the financial industry and found this little niche for myself where I get to do work that I love and don't necessarily have to deal with the investment side of things. You'll see I've been a big law exit strategist since 2018, which basically means that I help lawyers who want to make a career transition and make sure that they have money to enjoy the rest of their lives and a job that is also fulfilling. And just as a small disclaimer, because I'm a lawyer, my company does not give investment or tax planning or estate planning or legal advice. Everything that you're going to hear today, these are general guidelines. But when I'm working with my clients, I always make sure that they're going to be getting any investment advice that is specific for them from a registered investment advisor. And I'm going to just keep admitting people as we go along. Go ahead, Ro.
So hello, everyone. My name is Ro Thomas. I am a money coach for lawyers. I help lawyers master their finances so that they can create freedom and options for themselves. I have been coaching for about 4 years now, but I was previously a big law associate. I practiced trademark law for about 7 years at an AmLaw 100 firm. And in September of last year, I left the law to coach full time. Also around that time, my husband and I finished paying off about $500,000 of student loan debt, which is a big part of why I was able to make that transition. And, we are going to talk today about financial independence, which was a big part of us paying off all of that debt and setting ourselves up to be able to do more of the things that we really want to do without money being a consideration. So Jessica is going to talk to you about what financial independence is.
And just one more housekeeping issue. We are going to save time at the end for questions. So you guys are all muted right now to save us from the sounds of our households. But we will have time at the end for questions. You'll be able to unmute yourself if you want to ask Ro or I anything more specific. And also you'll be getting a recording of this Zoominar today, hopefully later today, if I can get everything edited. And so you'll have this for your reference, and we'll also include links to any resources that we discuss. So what is the FIRE movement? FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And some of you may have heard of this movement. It became, I think, really popular in kind of the early aughts. That's when you saw a lot of blogs popping up about the FIRE movement, about getting really aggressive about savings and trying to quit the rat race early. What you really want to do with the FIRE movement is you want to get to a point in your life where you no longer have to earn income in order to support your lifestyle. And what we mean by earn income is some sort of active job that you have to have in order to sustain your lifestyle. So FIRE tries to get you there as early as possible. And one of the back of the envelope calculations that you use to figure out when are you actually financially independent is when you have 25 times your annual expenses saved in some sort of growth vehicle. So there's, a couple of different spin-offs from the FIRE movement. We're going to talk about how those work, but this is a really important concept to keep in mind if you don't just want to work until you are 67, or what's more typical for Americans these days, even later, right? If we're not taking time to prepare for the future phases of our life where maybe we don't want to work either at the salary level or at the stress level that we currently do, we need to start taking steps early to prepare for that. And so, figuring out how can you start amassing this nest egg that could serve to, act as your income in the future, that's what we're going to talk about today. And so in the FIRE movement, beyond just, figuring out what your FIRE number is, right? The 25 times your annual expenses, one of the most important factors that you want to look at is what is your savings rate? The savings rate is such an important factor in the FIRE movement because it not only tells you how big your nest egg is getting, but it also tells you how much of your income are you actually living off of at any point in time. Because the less of your own income that you need to live, then the smaller a nest egg you might need in the future to support yourself. And so watching savings rate can be a really good way to see if you are on track for your FIRE goals. And the way that we look at savings rate is we basically want to take the amount of money that you are using toward your future and divide that by your disposable or your after-tax income. You can do that on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis, whichever ratio you want to use. Just make sure you're consistent so that your savings rate, as you compare it across time phases, is actually going to be relevant. But so we want to take a look at that number because that is going to show you so many good things about, how are you doing and how much money are you actually using for today versus tomorrow.
Yes, and as Jessica mentioned, reaching financial independence is tied to your expenses. And so your savings rate is really going to dictate how quickly you can achieve FIRE. For just a really easy example, if you have $50,000 in after-tax income and you save $5,000, your savings rate is 10%. Right. And so you want to make sure that your savings rate is as big as possible because that allows you to reach financial independence more quickly. Of course, your lifestyle comes into play here. And it's not to say, I think the mainstream media likes to highlight the people who are like, oh, I only eat ramen noodles and bike everywhere, but it doesn't have to be that. Like the financial independence community is varied. There are people who are striving to save enough that they can support six-figure expenses in financial independence and retirement. There are people who are just living very active lives and not worrying so much about the scrimping and cutting every single thing down to the bone and only eating ramen noodles. The main thing is making sure that when you are looking at your expenses, you're spending on things that you actually care about so that you can put more of that money toward your future, especially if you are really looking to the retire early piece where you want to be able to get out of the active working for money quicker.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really love about the savings rate calculation is it can help you track whether you are experiencing what we like to call lifestyle creep, right? So many of us have this tendency to, in a great way, make more money as we become more experienced, right? If you're at a law firm, you've got lockstep salary increases every year. You can probably count on those increases. And if you're watching your savings rate, if you can maintain your savings rate, even when you have increases in income, that means that you are not allowing that increase in income to go straight toward your lifestyle. You're taking part of that increase and you are also putting it toward your future. And that's really where you're going to get the momentum that you need to reach some of these FIRE goals even faster. So let's break down kind of what we see typically in terms of savings rate and what savings rates are more typical when you are a FIRE aficionado. When you are calculating your savings rate, we want to include any pre-tax savings that you're doing. Maybe you're making contributions to an employer-sponsored retirement account. Any of those, 401k contributions that you put in that you don't even see, that counts toward your savings rate. Anything you're putting in after tax into other types of retirement accounts, whether those are traditional IRAs or Roth IRAs, or anything else that is for long-term future goals. Any investments that you're doing in your run-of-the-mill brokerage accounts, if you have work with Wealthfront or Robinhood, if you're putting money in there and it's not too risky, then we can definitely include it as part of your long-term savings plan. For my clients, because the vast majority of them come to me with hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loan debt, similar to how I graduated from law school, we also include any extra money you're putting toward your debt payments. Because one of the big things about the FIRE movement is making sure that you have as few financial obligations with you in the future as possible. So the work that you're doing now to become debt-free, I think that counts towards your savings rate. It's much easier to pay for your early retirement if you don't also have to worry about debt obligations. So any money you're putting toward becoming debt-free, you can also count toward your savings rate. We generally, in the financial world, like to see a savings rate at about 20%. That's the ideal world. Most typical Americans hover around 2 or 3%. So already just trying to get to what, the experts say is ideal is going to be a stretch. But then we need to talk about if you actually want to retire early and maybe stop working at the clip that you're working now or stop work entirely, we're going to have to get a little more aggressive than 20%. And you can see on the chart here how it breaks down. If you wanted to retire completely and be able to live off of your financial independence nest egg in 20 years, you need to be saving 45% of your after-tax income. That's half of what you make, right? So it is aggressive. And that's for a 20-year timeline. It becomes even more aggressive as we shave years off of your savings timeline. And the reason why these numbers go up, so fast is because one of the biggest factors in getting you to financial independence is how long you have to the money to grow. And so when you are starting out as, you've just graduated from law school, maybe you're in your mid to late 20s and you have, some decades ahead of you and you would still be considered retiring early, you don't have to save as much in order to get to that endpoint because some of that growth will take care of building the nest egg for you. When you want to get out of the rat race in 5 years, well, you better be at 85% savings rate because you just don't have the time for that money to grow in order to become the nest egg that you need it to be. So you really need to be saving the vast majority of what you bring in and really living off of very little of what you make. And that's how you can reach financial independence on some of those shorter timeframes. It is aggressive, but it's really not the timeframe that a lot of our clients are looking at. That being said, this is for straight financial independence and retiring early, meaning you have no income coming in other than this financial nest egg that you've created for yourself. For many lawyers, we probably enjoy work. We just might not like the work that we're doing specifically every day, but we enjoy being productive. We like being part of a team. Maybe we do want to continue work in some capacity. So there are these tangents of the strict fire movement that I think work particularly well for attorneys. And this is what I talk about with my clients when we are doing some long-term financial planning of how they could have a career that really serves them, but still be able to enjoy the parts of their life. So one of the offshoots of the fire movement is called barista fire. It's named after the type of job that you might get in your semi-retirement. Let's say, you would be perfectly fine working at Starbucks for a few years. You just don't want to be a lawyer anymore. With the barista fire technique, what you want to do is get your fire nest egg to a point where it can support the vast majority of your semi-retired lifestyle, but you supplement that by bringing in a little bit of income. The other nice thing about bringing in a little bit of income is you also would hopefully be looking for a job that will provide you some workplace benefits. Health insurance is a huge deal. And one of the weak spots in the retire early movement is how do you deal with paying for health insurance if you're not old enough to qualify for something like Medicare? Right? Health insurance is usually tied to your employer. Now, things have changed with the Affordable Care Act. You actually can get, health insurance on the open market. And so that has really changed things for people who do want to have a non-conventional lifestyle, maybe want to have an unconventional work-life balance. And so barista fire can work really well if you are okay with a semi-retired lifestyle and you want to get out of the full-time workforce early. But my favorite technique, especially for attorneys, is what we call coast fire. With coast fire, you are still going to wait until your absolute retirement age to take distributions from your retirement accounts. So you're not going to be, drawing down from your nest egg early. Instead, what you do is you want to build up your nest egg to a point where it can grow on its own for the remainder of your working years. So if you can spend, and I've actually run this calculation with my financial planner, if you graduated from law school and maxed out your 401k contributions for 10 years, you would have over $2 million when you got to retirement age, even if you never contributed another dime. So this is the power of compound interest. This is the power of time with money in the market. And this is one of the strategies that can be really helpful for folks who might peak with their earning potential early in their career and be looking to make a transition into something that might not pay as well later in their career. If you can harness that extra income that you have earlier in your career, you could set up a nest egg that is large enough to sustain and grow to the amount that you need come retirement age. So what that lets you do is during the remainder of your working years, if you don't have to save for retirement, one of your biggest line item expenses is gone. That number one takes a little bit of stress off. But you're good, you're set up. Okay, maybe you can make some lifestyle choices now based on what your lifestyle actually costs instead of on what retirement is going to cost you in the future. And that can be really powerful if you're looking to make career transitions that might involve something like a pay cut.
We have touched a little bit on this because we talked about your savings rate, but we really want to hone in on the power of reducing your expenses. So I think looking at your expenses generally is a super powerful exercise, especially when you're super busy. You're probably paying a lot of things, a lot for convenience, things like that. I find with my clients, they often don't know how much they're spending in a month. They don't know like what they're spending on. And when they get in there, they don't like everything that they're spending on and they don't like the amount that they're spending. So, with really taking a look at your expenses, and one thing in the financial independence movement, I talk a lot about spending according to your values. And when you do that and look at what you truly care about and you align your spending accordingly, the overwhelming majority of people are going to end up spending less, right? Because they're spending on the things they care about, they're being more intentional about it versus just letting all the money go. There is a great graphic, I should have included it here, but it talks about the way that we tend to look at money. And it's like a line graph and it shows your income increasing over time and your needs also increasing along with the income over time. And then like your savings kind of staying static. We want to flip that, right? Where you are able to save more, which you can do when you're not spending everything. And then also it allows you to spend less and you need less to actually achieve financial independence. Because financial independence is tied to your expenses. If your expenses are lower, you don't need as much money, right? And then you're able to save more because you've got more of that income available to put toward your future. So we say it's twice as powerful as earning more. Like, let's take a good look at your expenses, like where your money is going right now. Do you like that? Do you not? Do you want to make some changes? How can we have more of that money going toward your future? Because we say all the time, your wealth is built in the gap between your income and expenses. And for many of us, that gap is very small, right? 2 to 3%, like Jessica said. We want to make that gap larger, and that allows you to build wealth and ultimately achieve financial independence and be able to retire.
Yes, and so Ro and I, we have these conversations with clients and we can crunch all kinds of numbers for you, but there's nothing like a good story, right? There's nothing like seeing what an actual journey looks like and the different decision points that come up along the way if you really are interested in embarking on your own fire journey. So let me just start by saying I knew nothing about fire when I graduated from law school. To be fair, I knew nothing about money. This accredited financial counselor thing came out of a need inside of myself to be better with personal finances because I didn't want to be a lawyer anymore. And that can be an expensive decision, right? Or at least costly. But so once I realized that I really didn't want to practice law for the rest of my career, I knew that I had to get a handle on my personal finances. And I needed to find a path that would allow me to take a much lower paying job so that I could have the work-life balance that I wanted, that I could have some relief from what was a very stressful practice and just do something different with my time and with my energy. And so one of the first things that I did was I took a very hard look at my own student loan debt. It was probably, gosh, at least 5 to 8 years that I spent at my firm making good money, but not making very good headway on my student loans. It just wasn't my top priority. I figured it would take me 30 years to pay them off anyway. What's the point of throwing extra at it? But once I realized that I didn't want to have that salary for the rest of my career, I knew I needed to get out from these, overwhelming student loan debt payments that I had. I am old enough that I had to have a mix of private loans and federal loans when I was in law school. And I paid the price for that. right? Because with the private loans, the interest rates were higher. They were all variable. There was very little relief that was available in terms of, the private loan payments. And so what I ended up doing is I took a look at all of my student loan debt and figured out a strategy that I could start attacking it in a way that really made sense for me. And so my federal loans, I will say this, the best thing that happened to me in my debt history is I was able to consolidate my federal student loans when I graduated from law school at less than 2%. So I had a bunch of federal student loans, but they were at like 1.75%, which is basically free money. And there was no reason for me to pay those off more aggressively than every other financial obligation I might have in my life. My private student loans were a higher interest. My mortgage was a higher interest. My car loan was a higher interest. There were all these other things that I wanted to spend my money on before I attacked my federal student loans. So I pretty much left them alone and I made my minimum payments on those. But what that allowed me to do is any additional money that I had was freed up to attack my private loans. And when I was really considering getting out of the law, I was making 3 times the minimum payment on my private loans to try to bust through, to just get to the principal, right? Sometimes we're making payments on our loans and it's just kind of shaving off the interest every month. You really do need to be aggressive depending on what your loans look like. But when I went to the federal government and I switched from my law firm, I did take a huge pay cut, but they also have so many workplace benefits in the federal government that it really opened up possibilities for me. And one of them was being able to take advantage of the Federal Repayment Assistance Program. So the SEC paid a portion of my federal loans every year that I was working there. And that also allowed me to throw even more money at my private loans. And so that was one strategy that I used to try to attack the worst kind of debt for me to be able to allow me to get out of debt faster. In addition to just the student loan question, as my life progressed, my children got older, I ended up buying a house eventually when I felt comfortable that I could handle a mortgage payment and all the things that went along with home ownership. But as those obligations in my life went away, so as my children aged out of daycare, as I paid off my car loan, all of those things, I didn't add them back in when they went away. I took that as, okay, I've released a financial obligation. Let me not go out and get a new car. Let me take what I was using for my car payment and put that toward my retirement, or let me throw that at my high interest debt. And so making sure that as you shed expenses in your life, you don't just replace them with new ones. That's where you can really pick up momentum and make a huge difference in your savings rate and in your timeline to getting into financial independence. And the last point I always want to make, because my FIRE journey was originally started as a single mom. I had planned, obviously I had a whole plan, right, for how I was going to do this because I'm a lawyer and I can't do anything if I don't have it laid out 10 years in advance. So I had a 10-year plan of what I was going to do and exactly how my money was going to work. And I would end, with half of what I have to make. I don't have to be a lawyer anymore. I can go work at a Starbucks or something. I would have my retirement nest egg. My children's college education would be taken care of. I would have all of my ducks in a row. I met my husband during this time period. He was retiring from the Army. He had served over 20 years. And I have to tell you, his brain was wired very differently than mine. And he said, you know what? 10 years, that's too long. Let's do it in 5. We can do this. It's going to be fine. We'll just make it up. We'll improvise. Oh, that was so uncomfortable. But for the first time in my life, I had a partner who actually made money. And so that completely changed the trajectory of my timeline, because instead of me having to step in immediately and just kind of retire from the law into another career, his income replaced what I had planned on bringing in myself. So we were able to make that leap even earlier without me having to develop an entirely new career in order to handle that transition. Was I prepared to do that? Absolutely. But did I have to, practically speaking, did it roll out that way? No. Do you have to be married to work FIRE? Absolutely not. Does it help? Yeah, maybe, depending on your partner's spending habits. But I'm going to let Ro talk a little bit more about that because she was married during her entire journey.
My story is a little bit different from Jessica's because I had no intention of leaving the law. Thought I was going to be in the law my entire career. Like I was that first year that went to my team leader, like, hey, so I want to be a partner. Like, tell me the steps I need to take to do that. Right. But we came across FIRE when we were looking at how to pay down our debt. So about 5 years ago, I had my first child, who you may hear running back and forth upstairs. And we were considering me taking advantage of my firm's reduced hours policy. If you're not familiar with that, it's basically a part-time policy where I could bill a percentage of the billable hour requirement for the corresponding percentage of my salary. So, if I went to 80%, I would get 80% of my salary. We looked at our finances and realized that we had over $670,000 of debt and a negative $342,000 net worth. So, needless to say, I was not taking advantage of the reduced hours policy. We could not afford the pay cut. The breakdown on that debt, about $200,000 was our mortgage. We had about $10K on a car loan, and then the rest of it, the majority of it, was student loans. And so we were researching how to pay it off, all of that, and came across financial independence. And this whole idea of like being independent of your income from a job, like being able to make choices for your life, have that kind of flexibility for yourself without money being a major consideration, really appealed to us. And so our focus was paying down our debt because, unlike Jessica, we had like 6.8 and 7.9% on our student loans. And I know. And my husband also had like a small private loan that was like 9 something percent. And so we wanted to work on paying off our debt. And so that was the main thing we did. We used the debt snowball method where we paid them from smallest balance to largest balance, but it was like it went from like $1,500, $2,000 to like $350,000, which was my husband's student loan. And so we worked on all of that over time and paid off everything but the mortgage at the end of last year. At the same time, we maintained our living expenses, relatively speaking, throughout that time, even as our income increased. So Jessica mentioned the concept of lifestyle creep earlier. Like that was something that we didn't want to get into, right? So we had our house, we had our cars. We did end up getting a new car when we had our second kid, because my husband was driving a coupe at the time and we could only fit one adult and one child in it. So we got a bigger car when we had another kid. But like overall, we kept our expenses about the same. I have to note there though, a lot of times I think people think like, oh, you're a money coach. And so you're going to tell me that I got to scrimp and like whatever, I got to cut all the things. I am very much about spending on things that you care about and things that you value. And so within those expenses that we maintained, were things like vacations, going out to eat, like things like that that were important to us because we wanted to make sure that we were still living, a good quality life, the type of life that we wanted to live, because we knew it was going to be a while. We had $670,000 of debt. Like I'm not just going to sit home and eat ramen noodles for, however long. So that was the thing for us. And I think that is what trips a lot of people up where, we get raises, and then it's like, oh, well, now I got to upgrade the house, I got to upgrade the car. I got to, whatever it is that we end up spending money on, and we don't see the benefit of those increases. So maintaining our expenses as our income increased allowed us to put more and more money toward our debt. And remember, Jessica was talking about with your savings rate, it's the money that you're putting toward your financial future, right? And so we were putting 50+% toward our financial future between our debt payments. And then also the last bullet here, we continue to invest in retirement and our brokerage accounts. We maxed out our retirement accounts for, the first year, year and a half, 2 years when we were in practice, because we were trying to do all the things that we were supposed to do, right? Like, so we were maxing our retirement accounts. We paid off our credit cards in full, all of that stuff, but we were not being intentional. So besides those things, the rest of it probably went to like all the local restaurants and Amazon and all the things. But when we decided that we were going to embark on this whole journey of financial independence, we knew that it was going to take us a while to pay down our student loans, and we didn't want to completely stop investing for that period. But we did want to put more of the money toward our student loans because our interest rates were so high. So what we did was we dropped our retirement contributions down to about 3%. My husband has a match at his employer. I didn't have a match at mine, but we just both did our 3%, like, okay, we'll continue to invest in that way. And then my husband was also like, oh, but I feel like we should be saving something, And so my compromise was like, we already had our emergency fund set. So I was like, okay, well, we could do like, say, $200 a month in this brokerage account. That way it's not like going into a savings account, earning no interest while we're paying all this interest on our debt. but it also appeases him, to be able to save something, because that is money that we could access outside of, retirement without penalty and all that kind of stuff. So that was our plan. We worked that plan for a little over 5 years. And then at the end of last year, we were able to finish paying off all of the student loans. So now we have no debt but our mortgage. And we have since gone back to maxing out my husband's retirement account. I no longer have access to my retirement account because I left my firm at that time. So I'm in business for myself. But we did that. And then we've also been able to look at the things that we're spending on. Do we want to increase this a little bit? Because now, let me tell you guys, the minimum payment on that debt was literally somebody's salary. Like my minimum payment was $1,000. His was like $3,500. So now it's $4,500 that we are not sending out, to the loan servicers and all of that. So looking at, okay, we really value travel, for instance. So we've been saving for let's take some trips when the world opens back up, all of that kind of thing. But it goes back to being intentional about your spending, not just letting it go, swiping wherever, but okay, this is something I really care about. Let me plan for it. Let me put money toward this so that I can spend on it, but also make sure that I'm taken care of for the future. So you see, Jessica and I both have the Coast Fire designation there. So we both have achieved Coast Fire. And as Jessica mentioned, it's, you have invested enough that your investments will grow to the amount that you need to live off of by the time you reach traditional retirement age. So even if my husband and I never put another dollar into our retirements or other investments, we will have more than enough to live off of by that time. We have continued to invest, but again, as I said, we've revisited some of our spending, okay, we could do, another trip or, that type of thing, looking at what we care about, what we want to spend on, and doing a little bit more of that because we've really set ourselves up for the future financially.
And just having the benefit of being able to leave your job and not have to worry that it's going to impact your long-term retirement savings. I mean, that is just, that's my sweet spot. That's where I'm trying to get all of my clients to where Ro is. Getting them to the point where if they want to leave, they can. You don't have to, right? You can continue contributing to these accounts. You can continue working wherever you want. But the whole point of the financial independence retire early movement is not necessarily to actually leave the workforce. It's to be able to choose to leave the workforce if you want to.
Exactly. To be able to make those decisions for yourself and not be, I'm stuck here because I need this money. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if all of the things that we have talked about sound good to you, we've got a few quick tips for getting started on your own journey to financial independence. The very first one is one that has kind of been weaved throughout our conversation today, but it's getting clear on what you value. Again, a lot of times we're spending a lot of money and not really paying attention to what we value. Jessica, I know you take your clients through an exercise of really honing in on what your overarching values are. I do something similar in terms of what you value in terms of your spending, right? You're spending a quarter of your income on takeout. Do you really value the food like that? Or is there something else that you care about a little bit more? And something to consider is every dollar you spend on things that you don't value, or dollars that you cannot spend on the things that you do value, and dollars that are keeping you from achieving financial independence or any other financial goals that you have.
Yeah, and in terms of, examining that current spending, there is a couple of frameworks that I also take my clients through when we are really looking at, all right, what's going on with your money? And sometimes I feel like, a lot of the personal finance world gets very obsessed with the nitty-gritty details, which you can absolutely pay attention to. But at the end of the day, we do want to be paying attention to some of these bigger financial indicators, like what is your savings rate? What is your FIRE number? What are you aiming for? And is what you're currently doing working toward that goal or hindering your progress? And so you are going to have to take a look at your money. There's no way to make this work without us learning some numbers. But once you have some of those numbers in hand, it doesn't necessarily have to be an exercise of this level of effort for the entire time, right? You're going to have some benchmarks, and you just need to make sure that you're watching those benchmarks as you move along and improving along the way.
Indeed. The next tip is to make a plan for your debt. We have both laid out two different strategies for debt. It really is a matter of personal preference. Some people say, like, hey, I want to pay off all of my high interest debt and I'm going to let the rest of this ride, like Jessica did. Others, like us, are like, no, I want to get rid of it all. Let's just go ahead and pay it out, pay it off. But the main thing to keep in mind when you have debt is when you are like carrying those balances, the power of compound interest is working against you, especially when you've got the high interest debt. So you're paying more the longer you keep that debt around versus when you pay it off more quickly.
And we did get a question already. I'm just so impressed with myself that I was able to watch the chat while this was going on. I generally don't multitask like this. Talking about, more learn about investing and talking about investments in today's day and age versus the pure savings given the low interest rate environment. As I said in the beginning, I'm not allowed to give investment advice. I don't need my SEC friends coming after me. That being said, there are so many resources out there to get started as an investor. You do not need to work with an investment advisor in order to start on this journey. We're going to give links to some of our favorite resources that have some of the tips in terms of getting started on investing. But thinking about what is going to be your DIY strategy? How risk averse are you? Are you someone who's going to look at your investment account statements and your stomach is going to drop out if you see some fluctuation? I've been telling all of my clients, don't you dare look at your statements right now. All I want you to look at is your gains from last year. Don't pay attention to what's happened this first quarter. It's a nightmare out there. But the whole point is, these are supposed to be long-term investments, right? So we want to consider the long game. And when you are thinking about, the long journey to FIRE, there are going to be different phases where you have to treat those investments differently, right? The way that you invest at the beginning of a 20-year journey is going to be very different than the way that you are invested at the end of that 20-year journey when you are getting ready to use that money. And so when I'm talking to my clients about short-term savings accounts, high yield savings accounts, right? Extremely conservative, up to a certain amount that's FDIC insured, you're not going to lose out on your principal. You also aren't going to see a lot of growth. And you have to balance that against the growth that you could see if you were invested in something that is higher risk than a bank account, but it still needs to be within your risk tolerance. And, but learning about the different types of investments, learning about some basic index funds or basic ETFs or, just easy allocations that you can get, from the big brokerage houses I don't make recommendations, but like things like Vanguard, Fidelity, TD Ameritrade, Charles Schwab, anywhere where you want to open an account, that's going to get you started on a path. And for many people, it's taking that first step that is so difficult and so scary. But once you start making the contributions, especially on a regular basis, then it becomes like everything else that you do in your life. You barely think about it. You just want to check in every year and make sure that it's still aligned with your goals.
I completely agree with that. And one other point that I want to add to the investing point is make sure that you understand what you're investing in. Like, don't just go with the hot stock tip that your uncle, gave you or whatever. Like, really take the time to learn about investing. I sometimes liken it to driving a car. Like, when you first drove a car, you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know which way I'm supposed to push the thing to make the left turn signal come on and, whatever. But once you learn about it, then it becomes very much second nature, like Jessica said. And the final tip is to enjoy the journey. I think it's so great that I am the one presenting this tip to you, because when we first started on our whole financial journey, I was very much like, got to do it right. And like feeling guilty if we did anything that wasn't responsible, and like, oh my gosh, we ordered takeout. Like, can we do it? We got all this debt, like, making it just like really miserable, a really miserable experience. And I think that lawyers tend to do that, right? Like, we want to do it right. We want to like make sure that we're doing things the right way. And so we're just going to buckle down and like willpower our way. And like, it's not about that, right? Like Jessica said, it's the long game. And so you want to make sure that you are enjoying the journey along the way, which is why it was important for my husband and me to make sure that we still had things like vacations, like, some money that we could go out to eat, those types of things that we enjoyed, so that it didn't feel like this miserable, like doom and gloom until we get there, however many years from now. So just make sure that you're taking the time to enjoy what you're doing along the way and not making it like terrible for yourself.
Yeah, for many of us, our jobs are stressful enough. Even if we enjoy them, The point is not to add another level of stress into your life.
Exactly.
It's to create the possibility for an even more comfortable future if you can just make some tweaks now. And that's really what we want you to be focusing on, not overhauling everything, though everyone who learns about fire, the first year you spend just like going crazy and like trying to do all the fire things. And then you calm down a little bit and maybe you go for one of the smolder versions because you decide that that is more in line with what you want for yourself, for your family, for your overall lifestyle. But just finding something that works for you and enjoying the journey.
Indeed. So we've got a few resources, recommendations for you if you're interested in learning more about financial independence. The first is there's a documentary and a book called Playing with Fire, came out maybe 2-3 years ago now. And it was all about one family's like journey. They discovered financial independence and like they went on this whole quest to like do it, like overhaul their lifestyle and all of that. At times they are a bit extreme, I will warn you now, but it is, I think, a really good introduction to like finding this information and setting out on doing it. The second one is the book Your Money or Your Life by Vicki Robin and Joe Dominguez. It was written in the 90s and updated again within the last 2 or 3 years. But it's a really good look at how much like money your life is actually costing you. And there's an exercise in there where they talk about like looking at all of the time that you spend related to your job. So not just, I was at my desk from 9 to 5, but like the time that you spend getting ready, the time that you spend commuting, like all of those things, and then calculating what the true cost per hour is of like your exactly the income that you're making, like how much are you truly earning per hour when you calculate all of the time that you spend. I thought that was really effective. And then the final one is an early retirement calculator. It's at networthify.com, and you can put in your numbers and they will tell you how many years it will take you to get to financial independence based on where you're starting and how much you're able to contribute and that type of thing. So hopefully those resources will be helpful for you.
And I will add another resource. This is what actually motivated me to get started on the FIRE movement. Mr. Money Mustache runs a very fascinating website, lots of blog articles on there. He's kind of one of the kings of the FIRE movement. I say it with the caveat that there are some ways that he rubs people in completely the wrong way. And so when I was getting started on my journey, I ignored that stuff. And I just focused on the strategy and on the change in the mindset, right? I think, what's interesting is, especially if you're a lawyer working for a law firm, you are very well acquainted with the concept of time for money, right? We literally keep track of every hour of every day. But we generally only keep track of the hours that we get to charge someone else. We're not keeping track of all of the rest of the time, right? That isn't billable, that still eats up and creates so much stress and so much of our practice. And so really getting a handle on, is that time worth it, right? What do you want to be doing with that time instead? And what do you need to do to set yourself up so more of that time can belong to you and not to your employer? And, I think, his website is very good about kicking you in the butt and getting you to start thinking about different ways to approach your life and your lifestyle. But of course, I have to say with my caveat, because there are some things that just rub me the wrong way in there. But he's not everyone's flavor. But it was a really good introduction to the movement, and it certainly lit a fire under my butt.
Yeah. All right, Jessica, tell the people how they can work with you, how they can connect with you, all the things.
Absolutely. So you can definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. I post on there and share finance tips on there. But come check me out on my website at www.jessicamedinallc.com. I have a lot of blog articles on student loan repayment, on getting out of big law, on balancing your budget, and a little bit more about my specific story. And so you can get a lot of resources on there, and you can learn exactly how I paid off my $200,000 of student loans. It's a personal story, but hey, go ahead and follow it. It would work for you too.
Indeed. And please come connect with me as well. I think the best way to connect with me is through my website at rothomas.com. has a link to my podcast, Wealthy-esque, as well as my social media handles. As Jessica said, I too am often on LinkedIn, and then I also love Instagram as well. So come connect with me over there. And I hope that we can chat more about all of the FIRE things. So now we can get into some questions. And I know that you guys have been in the chat. So let's see what we got.
Let me give people the power to unmute themselves. You're welcome. Everyone now has power if you want to unmute yourself. Also, if you guys have questions and you want to pop them in the chat, then Ro and I can address them on here. I will also say, Ro and I are both, we both work with lawyers, we both help them with money. And a lot of times people ask me, well, so how do I know if I should work with Jessica or should I work with Ro? Like, do you guys do the same thing? Like, do you have the same philosophies? And I mean, Ro and I really are kindred souls. We approach a lot of money issues in a very similar way. I would say, if you're trying to figure out who might be a better person to work with, first of all, we're both amazing. But second of all, I specialize in helping lawyers make career or life transitions. So if you have a big career transition that you're considering, or you have a big life change that's coming up, you really want to get into a house, you're starting a family, something that is stressing you out that you're not sure whether your career choices are going to be able to sustain you financially, I'm fairly strategic in the work that I do with my clients to help you answer those really tough questions and help you build the money management skills that will take you from here and beyond. But I want to give Ro a chance to describe, the kinds of work that she does with her clients.
Yes. So I am more like, you're not necessarily in this, like, I've got to get out of my firm. Like, if that's you, definitely go work with Jessica. But if you just have the general, I feel like I'm bad with money, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know like how I can pay off my debt, I don't know how much I should be saving, like all of those types of things are the types of things that I work with my clients on. And a lot of it is helping you to transform your relationship with money, the way you think about money, the way you think about yourself as related to money. And from there, you're able to achieve your goals and you feel a lot more confident. You have the certainty that you know exactly what you're doing with your finances.
So definitely reach out to both of us. We would love to chat with you more about your own personal money situation. And of course, we love talking about FIRE, but I don't see any more questions in the chat and I haven't seen anyone unmute themselves. So I'm going to give you something that you rarely get any day, and that is your time back. Thank you so much, everyone.
There was a question in the chat. It was a while back. Someone asked, did you have sinking funds for those other expenses? But I'm not sure which expenses those were. So I can tell you, like for me, I did have or do have like sinking funds for, different expenses. So for instance, things that come up, like our car insurance, for instance, is biannually, right? So like we do have kind of a sinking fund for that type of thing. But if that's not what you're talking about, then feel free to message me and we can chat about it more. And then I see someone asked about posting the links to the website, so I can do that.
Yeah, we're also going to send all of the links to all of the resources around with the link to this recording. So you will also have all of that in one place.
Oh, well, I'm not going to do
it. Whenever I type a link in the chat, it's always wrong.
All right, well, now we will give you your time back. Thank you so much for being here with us. Really appreciate your time. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Jessica or me.
And thank you, Ro, for joining me today. You are my sister in FIRE, and I really do. I know that this has been kind of a new concept for some of the people who joined, and it is so exciting when you learn about it. I think it really does provide a level of freedom and independence that you might not think is possible for yourself, but now you have the building blocks to get started.
Indeed. And thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure always to be with you.
Absolutely.